So a very good afternoon everyone, or evening depending on when you see this. I hope you've all had a lovely Easter and like me you've had your fair share of chocolate. We all need that sometimes. I'm going to give you some feedback on the SONA assessment, and this comes from all of the tutors. And as you know, it's actually feed forward instead of feedback. So there was a lot of things that went really well. I really could tell the difference between this SONA assessment and the one that you did last semester. In particular, you were much more aware of the ethical issues surrounding experiments. For example, what should be included in a consent form, and what should experimenters tell you? Why is sometimes deception necessary? You were much more aware of that, which is great to see. Also, you may remember last time I said to you, you've got to actually give reasons why you enjoy the experiment, not just say I enjoyed it because it was interesting, but say I enjoyed it because it was very different from any other experiment, or it was enjoyable because it relates to another course that I'm studying. And this time you really did that, which is great. Also, you seem to be quite aware of your own performance in the experiment, which is probably because you've already done it once, so you know what to look out for, and you know what sort of things might actually affect you, and you seem to be quite aware of how you either got better or got worse in your performance. In general, many of you criticize the study. Not everyone, I'll come back to that later. And also, in general, you were able to find articles that were related to the topic and describe them. Again, not everyone, and I'll come back to that as well. Because there are things for improvement. There's always room for improvement, which doesn't apply for everyone, but these are just the general things that many people had in common across all classes. First thing is, and that was so common that it's top of the list, make sure you answer all of the questions. For this third section, the critical evaluation, these questions, they're not there as optional things. You've got to answer them to get the full mark. Shows you that you've actually evaluated the study. Don't forget to attach the original debrief, or if you have forgotten, send it to me later, like some of you have done. If things went missing, they often went missing here. Can you think of a different procedure to test the same hypothesis? In other words, what other method could you use to test, for example, the effect of eye gaze duration on how much you like somebody? That was one of the experiments. So what other method? Sometimes it was missing, this question, but other times it was confused with one of the other questions. What improvements could you make to this study? So I've just put them side by side here. An improvement to the current procedure would be, for example, having moving faces instead of static ones, using a more varied range of questions instead of only just this questionnaire, or instead of images on a computer, using paper cards, as opposed to an entirely different procedure, which could be like EEG instead of using a questionnaire to test something, instead of rating a personality of a fake person description on paper, actually setting up a real speed dating event, just off the top of my head, or instead of an implicit association test, this was one of the experiments that used that, measure the behavioral effects towards gay lecturers. That was, they made up a Facebook page of a fictitious lecture, but how would that change if it was actually behavioral effects? So that they're completely different ways of testing the same thing, as opposed to just improvements to something similar. So make sure you distinguish between those things. Something else that went missing sometimes was this journal article that you had to find. And this had to be a different article to the one that was measured, that mentioned on the debrief form. You did get a mark if the description was good, but it was the article that was already mentioned. So you've got to find a different one. If you can't think of one, if it may be an area of research that hasn't been investigated a lot, then ask the experimenter. Email them back and say, well, can you recommend anything? Because they will have had to base it on something, and when they write up their results, they will need to refer to the literature. So make sure you do answer that question. Some other things that came up. This sentence, it was actually the same one. This was in there last semester. I guess the hypothesis and this affected my results. So you were aware that it was affecting the way you behaved, but what does that mean? Now you know a little bit more about experiments, how they should be conducted, and how, in an ideal world, the experimenter should disguise the purpose of the study, if that's what is needed. So you need to say, well, first of all, why is it that knowing the hypothesis influences your responses? In what way could you then change your responses? Is it something you can change? How would you do that? And then, if that happens for everybody, can you say then that might affect the study's validity? If all participants are responding based on what the experimenter wants to see, then you're not really measuring people's true response. You're not measuring what you want to measure. So validity is impaired. When it came to actually criticizing the experiment or evaluating, because evaluating is about good and bad, some people still said, I couldn't think of anything that could have been improved, which is not a possible answer on this SONA assessment. You've got to try to think of something, because experiments are never perfect. They may look perfect, because obviously on debrief they wouldn't say anything that says the opposite. But you've got to try and think of something. That's how science progresses. Even if it's a very small thing, it still might, in the long run, make a big difference. And also other things. The question, what was good about the experiment, and what was, so any negative aspects or any positive aspects. You've got to there show what you've learned on the course so far. You've learned a lot about what makes a good design and what makes proper scientific conduct. All those things you've got to show us. So avoid saying the experiment was good because it was short, or it was bad because it was too long and it was boring. Those are no longer okay things to say as an evaluation. You've now got to show that you know about validity. So perhaps the experiment was good because you thought it really measured what it was supposed to measure, or perhaps it used a standardized questionnaire, which meant it was probably reliable. Or you might say, well, the experiment was actually not so good because I can think of a few confounding variables, X and Y, Z, which could also explain the result. Or you might say, well, they used an implicit association test to see how biased we are to gay people, but they only tested university students, and we might be more liberal than people in the general population. So we're not sure how generalizable, well, I don't know where the emphasis is, how well you can generalize this study, get there in the end. So you got to show that you know about that. And also, perhaps you could say something about order effect. Maybe you had to do the experimental conditions in a particular order. Maybe you actually learned something from doing it the first time to doing it the second time. Perhaps you might say, well, you should have used a between subjects design instead to counteract that. So all these things you have to put into your evaluations. Data were stored confidentially and were anonymous. That's not possible. It's either one or the other. So confidential means you know who the participants are, but you're not telling anybody else about that. Anonymous means that you can't actually trace the data back to an individual person. Some people struggle with the distinction between reliable and valid. Reliable means that next time you do the test, maybe the next day, you get approximately the same result. So how reliable is it over time? Validity is about measuring what you want to measure. You want to measure people's intelligence and not their ability to understand the language that the test is written in. Independent variables need a name, and that actually applies to the debrief sheets as well. Some of the debrief sheets I saw didn't actually say that. So if that was the case, you didn't get any marks deducted if you didn't write that. But it is a pointer perhaps to make for me to the ethics committee that we need to make sure that we write debriefs where independent variables do have names and things are properly specified. So independent variables are not the same as conditions. Independent variables have conditions. So it would be incorrect to say the independent variable was the two ownership conditions, even though some debriefs actually say that, which is very wrong. It should be, no, it should not be this one either. The independent variable was whether objects were owned by yourself or by the other participants. No, it should be the independent variable was ownership, so that's its name, with two conditions, self and other. That's the way to write it. Lastly, try to avoid spoken language. For example, instead of saying it could have swayed my results, no, you need to say it could have influenced my result. Or it lasted roughly half an hour. No, it lasted approximately half an hour. Just little things. Data were instead of data was, because data is a plural form. It's dependent with an E and not dependent with an A. And also, and this was actually the first time that I saw that, it wasn't so much last time, make sure you write in the correct tense. So instead of saying the consent form stated that I can withdraw, it should be the consent form stated that I could withdraw. That was all the feedback we had for you this round. Last thing I want to say to you is make sure you use this feedback. It's a very important source of information that you could use to your advantage. The things that we've brought up here are things that will come back in most of your assignments throughout the next 3 years. It's about critical thinking, about scientific language, and about how to evaluate a study. So use it as feed forward rather than just seeing it as a judgment on your performance, which it is not. It is here to help you. And also along that line, please do get in touch if there's anything on your report that you think, ooh, Miriam, I don't know don't know what you're saying there, I don't understand this. Or if you have any ideas for how you could improve a particular study, or if you got inspired, please do talk to me if you're in my group, or to your own tutor. So I wish you a very productive revision 3 weeks. Make sure you take a proper break as well. It's very healthy for the brain. And I will see you in exam week.